welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support all those going through a relationship breakdown and all the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Liza Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we are joined by the wonderful Sue Atkins, a firm favourite with us here at Stowe. Sue is a parenting coach who'll be discussing how to single parent successfully. Welcome back to the podcast, Sue. It's lovely to have you with us again. Can you start just by introducing yourself, letting us know a little bit about your background for anybody that hasn't listened to the previous episodes, and give us a bit of information about your current role?
Right, well, I'm a former deputy head and I was a class teacher for over 22 years, and I retrained as a coach, and I specialise in helping parents go through raising happy, confident kids. And I wrote a journal for children that's won an award called the Divorce Journal for Kids, and I wrote a Suddenly Single journal for parents who find themselves suddenly navigating being a single parent. I also now host Navigating the Digital Jungle, which is a podcast around all sorts of digital life, but also how do you navigate that as a co-parent? Because that can be quite difficult too, because, you know, you don't always sing from the same song sheet with children. So I write, I broadcast, I've produced a new book all around that topic as well. But my passion is to, you know, help parents navigate whatever aspect of parenting that they're going through, because it's not easy. And it needs a bit of support sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not easy. Got three children myself. I can definitely agree that it's not easy. I mean, today's topic is single parenting. And I've got a few facts and figures. So as of 2023, there were 3.18 million single parent families in the UK. And that made up about a quarter of families with dependent children. And 90% of those families, the single parents, were women. So this is quite a huge number of families across the UK. Perhaps we could start by, how do you clarify single parenthood? What does that mean?
Gosh, yes, because single parenthood is not just because you are separated or you're divorced. I mean, you could have the death of a partner. It could be the fact that, you know, you are by choice, like adoption or IVF, or you have separated, as we say, the usual one. But there's the sole custody or the shared custody or the co-parenting kind of agreement. So it's a wide variety of going through it. Sometimes it's through choice, sometimes it's really not. But much of it is quite exhausting when you're dealing with single parenthood, because you're juggling all sorts of things and you're doing it on your own. So it does need support, really. And that's why I'm delighted to talk to you today about it.
I mean, I think exhausting was the word that leapt into my head, and it always is when you think about single parenting. So yeah, I've got a couple of kids, and it is exhausting looking after kids when you've got someone to look after them with you. And, you know, when you are flying solo, it's, you know, it must be incredibly hard. I mean, is that the main challenge? Obviously, there's lots of challenges, and maybe we should go through a few of them. Is that sort of the main challenge in terms of, you know, the effort that's involved to successfully parent your kids and then not burn out yourself?
Well, yes. I mean, there's the emotional strain to start with, you know, managing your own emotions initially as well when you're going through that process, and long term when you're going through it, you know, supporting your child through the adjustment. Then there's the financial pressures that suddenly you have to sort of think about. You may not have had to deal with those before. Often managing the household on a single income is not easy to navigate. Time management is a big one, balancing your work commitments with your routines and with your household duties and with childcare. That's a big one. And also your own personal well-being. That tends to go, you know, get a bit lost when people are going through that. Then there's, you know, you add in co-parenting conflict to some of that, because it's not all plain sailing, let's face it. And, you know, you've got different boundaries, you've got different sort of relationships now with your ex. So there's also loneliness and feeling a bit isolated, because you sort of suddenly step back socially sometimes while you're focusing on, you know, your household duties, your work, your children, and that can take a toll on you too mentally. But there are positives, of course there are. So I don't like to always just stay stuck in the negatives. I mean, you do get this stronger bond with your children. You know, a real trust forms between you sometimes, between the single parent and the child. There's that personal growth. You know, perhaps you are learning to manage finances and you didn't do that before, and you have more resilience resilience and you have more independence and you do gain some confidence from having to handle some of these things. And then there's the opportunity to create your own traditions, which is really nice. Freedom to shape your family's culture and routines, even if a simple thing like Christmas. If you didn't have a real tree at Christmas, now you can have a real tree if you want to. I mean, that's pretty simple and pretty basic. But also I think it's really good because kids are watching, learning, looking at you. And if you model resilience and strength over time, then your children are learning some very important life lessons by watching you adapt to your new situation.
There's so much to unpack there and get into. I wonder if we want to start with the kind of, before we actually talk about the parenting stuff, the looking after number one. The old put on your oxygen mask first thing. So how do you, as a single parent, and let's say this is a situation where this isn't co-parenting, so you don't have someone who has the kids at weekends or whatever it may be, you are literally on your own. How do you, as a solo parent, carve out that time for yourself to avoid exhaustion, to avoid burnout, and particularly if you've got young kids, which are obviously more kind of demanding on time and kind of day-to-day attention? How can you start to do that? What's the best tips?
Well, the first tip is to be mindful of that and to manage your time. We've all got 24 hours in a day, and it's about being mindful that you need to carve out that. I call it self-care. It's not selfish, because if you're running on empty, then you haven't got any more to give and you end up impatient, tired and a bit snappy with the kids. So actually carving out some time, and it doesn't have to be huge amounts of time. You don't have to go away for a weekend or anything. It can be sort of, half an hour here or 10 minutes there where you get a balance. I remember even when I was teaching, when I was deputy head and I had 2 small children and all the responsibility of looking after everybody else's kids, got home and was quite tired. And that would be the time when my children were allowed their TV time then. And I would make a cup of tea and I would sit down in the kitchen. And I think I remember reading the paper or something for 15, 20 minutes before I started all this, the homework and the dinner and getting ready for bed and all the rest. So it is very important. And remember that it's not selfish. It is self-care, because you do need to replenish your batteries. Now, whatever that is. Another thing I used to do is meet a friend fairly regularly for a drink or go out for a meal or go to the cinema. You have different friends for different things, but keep your own life going too. It's very important, because then you come back, replenished, I think, really.
I think when you're dealing with co-parenting, I don't know about you, Matt, one of the complaints that I often get is that comments are made like, well, I'm not having the children then just so that you can go out and see your friends, or I'm not your babysitter. Comments like that, if you like, which can then lead to people feeling like it is selfish that they're looking to carve out that time. But that's, as you just said, that's really important, isn't it? How have you got any advice as to how to manage that type of conflict?
Well, yes, what I often say to the parents that I coach through divorce is to imagine that's like the red arrows. And if people are not from the UK and it's not VE Day and all the rest of it, but the red arrows flying over your head, because it just goes over your head. You've got to learn to let some things just fly over your head and not always rise to the bait of that kind of comment. Because if you know that it is actually important, and you're not just using the ex as the babysitter or whatever, and you know that it's, fair, and you've discussed it, and you know your own mind about that, then just let that go over your head and not rise to the bait of that. Because it's important that children see their other partner, as we've talked about before on the podcast. Very important that they have both sides of, the family to spend time with. So it's not selfish to do that. And if you're using that time not just do the ironing, or do cutting the grass, if you're actually using it to have fun with your life, that's very important to keep your life going.
Yeah, people can feel a bit guilty about that, I think, sometimes. And, it's still it's the self-care point. But what about support networks for this sort of thing? The whole it takes a village to raise a child thing. That is important, but can be quite difficult for people to feel like they're asking for help or being a burden on others, can't it?
Yes, it can. And we're not very good at sometimes reaching out and seeing that it's about support. So you can do that even online, but also you can find groups on Facebook and online to come offline. I'm a great believer in face-to-face. And I noticed just the other day, there was a group that was, I think it was on Facebook, about mums pushing prams and going around the park in the sunshine, because you're just walking and talking and chatting. And, if you've got young children and you're going through that, but even if you haven't got separation and divorce, it's very healthy to meet up with people in real life too. And not just, certainly when you're going through divorce or separation, not just to join the pity party and slag exes off and be all kind of negative. There's a place for that, of course. But then it's about, right, now let's be more positive about my life. I'm going to start slowly and surely moving myself out of this sort of place into a happier place. And that does take time. You have to forgive yourself that it's not instant, doesn't happen quickly. But if you find a like-minded person and you've made a new friend and you start to do slightly new things that you hadn't done before, that's really wonderful. And you must learn to pat yourself on the back. We're terrible at not patting ourselves on the back. We're always judging ourselves and feeling guilty and being negative. So do pat yourself on the back. You must keep your own mental health strong, because you are then able to look after your children well and make better decisions in that place as well, I think.
So I guess another challenge then potentially, and there are a lot of things that you mentioned before, but something that I've often thought about that must be difficulty, and this goes back to the stats. If 90% of single parents are female, that implies that there's often a lack of a male role model. How can you address that? Or obviously the other way around, if you've got a single dad and there's no mum, if you're lacking a female role model, because it's important that children can see adults role modeling behaviors and things. How can you address those challenges?
Well, if you've got a brother or you've got a sister or they've got an aunt or an uncle or a friend, I know my own daughter, when she was 13, she met up with her friend Hattie, who we're still friends with. And I see myself in that sort of role, if you like, if I'm needed to be that kind of older person with a bit of experience and a bit of wisdom, hopefully. And you can look towards, when you're talking to your children online in particular about who they follow, if they're teenagers, tell me why you're following that celebrity or that person. And you can rein it in to then talk about, well, let's look at more positive role models around body image or whatever it might be, because they are getting influenced online a great deal. And with boys, particularly if they're going down that Andrew Tate route, you need to pull them back from that. And I've written about that on my blog, actually, around these ideas of role models, because it is important. And don't panic, though, if you haven't got an immediate one. Over time, you that will happen. But talking about it and exploring it with your kids is actually the most important part of that too, and let things happen more naturally. You don't have to have a big important role model immediately, but have that general sort of conversation about who they're following and who they're being influenced by. I think could be quite interesting for them.
There's been lots of talk about this in the media recently, isn't there? Because there was the Netflix Netflix program Adolescence.
Yes.
How I'm assuming you've been involved in lots of conversations kind of surrounding that and children.
Yes.
We're perhaps going slightly off topic, but I think it would be really interesting to hear your views on that.
Oh my goodness, I've got a power hour where I go into schools and organisations and deliver an power hour, which is 60 minutes, around how to handle that and the topics that came up in adolescence as well. Because the thing that struck me about that is they were great parents. And that was one of the part of the things that Stephen Graham really wanted to make sure. They weren't, outliers, and they weren't sort of, dysfunctional family. They were sort of an ordinary family. And they thought they were keeping him safe by keeping him upstairs in his bedroom. And she sort of said to him, it's 1 o'clock now, you need to turn off. And you think, but what's he doing? Who's he talking to? What's he kind of absorbing from that? And so that's where, again, you don't miss those moments. You need to put boundaries around your kids in terms of what they're watching, what they're listening to, and talking with them, not at them. Because if you just come at it sort of, I don't understand it, I don't like it, they're going to switch off. So if you're looking back to what we were saying about role models, use every opportunity to guide them and have those open conversations about all of those influences, and be mindful and be in their lives. And when you sit down and eat with them or chat with them or do stuff with your kids, no matter how old they are, ask questions around. I've got loads of stuff on my website around questions you can start to ask yourself that help start those conversations. I kind of specialize in scripts, which are, how do we start that conversation about all sorts of things, even divorce, as well as, all the adolescent stuff, because it is important that you are feeling confident in starting those conversations. You haven't got all the answers. None of us have got all the answers. Everything's changing so quickly with AI and all the rest of it, but keep involved in it. Keep being curious. Keep talking with your children, not at them. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, hugely important. And I think, our sort of most common thing that we come back to on whatever episode we have of the podcast is about communication, whether it's between parties who are thinking of getting divorced or are separated, or with children. And it strikes me that obviously, like, the nature of your communication with children changes a lot over the time. When they're little,
Yes.
you are leading,
Yes.
and kids depend on you, and you have that sort of special bond. You talked about the joy of single parenting, that special bond. As they get older, they probably get to sort of late primary school, start to become independent, start to become, maybe indifferent's not the right word, but certainly need you a lot less.
Yes.
And then secondary school is like the rebellion years, isn't it? It can be.
People always say that, right? But I didn't go through that with my own kids, and I didn't actually go through that with my parents. It's about communication. Yes, they're going to be more independent, but if you think, oh, it's going to be awful, it will be awful. You kind of set it up to be awful. Whereas if you just think, oh, how can we navigate it together and do it well? As long as you understand they're striving for independence and they're supposed to be leaving you, in a sense. They've got one foot in being a teen and one foot in trying to be an adult, and then another foot, I haven't got 3 feet, but they sort of want to be a child, and it's 3 days they're like that, and then 2 days they're back like that. So it is a transitional period. So keep chatting, keep talking, keep listening, and remember you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, because we tend to nag our teens, and that really, I mean, it's so annoying when people just nag at you. You switch off and you're not listening. So it is about evolving as a parent. You and your style has to change as they grow and want to mature and leave. But in fact, stay connected even more so in your adolescence life, because that's when they really need you, actually.
And if you are maybe struggling with that communication a bit, if you are experiencing some of the rebellious nature, if there are 2 parents, you have each other to talk to brainstorm ideas, to talk around. If you're a solo parent, that's got to be harder. So how, if someone's listening to this thinking, great, I'd love to be able to communicate with the team, but just every conversation is just going wrong at the moment, they're in a phase like that, it happens. How can you deal with that when you feel like, well, it's all on me? Because that's got to be a lot of pressure for a single parent.
It is. So find out, that pressure cooker moment, those feelings, and you need to let that off somewhere safely. So not in front of the kids all the time. Find the help and support that you might need. That's when I sometimes come in and talk to people for an hour to help them look at how they negotiate the teenage years. Because it doesn't take an awful lot of change, but it does take, perhaps, you look at your tone of voice, you look at your body language, you look at what are your triggers and their triggers. What are you arguing about? Make a little note on a piece of paper of, oh, this seems to be a common theme, this one. And then allowing that kind of give and take, but keeping them safe. It is an art, not a science in a way. It's quite tricky, but I think you can navigate it. And if they are being a bit arsey, then think about, well, why? And what can I do to sort of help that? And then they'll meet you sort of halfway about that, and then find something neutral that you can do that you used to always enjoy doing together. We used to go to Chelsea, as we're Chelsea supporters, and so as a whole family we would go off, and we were season ticket holders for a number of years, and we'd go off there, so we could then nag and complain about the goalie or the referee being useless or something. We had a common theme of something else that united us but didn't actually cause conflict between us. And yeah, we've got to adapt as parents. That's some of the problem, I think, is that parents can't adapt, or they don't notice that they need to. So you have to stay present in your child's life whilst letting them go incrementally.
I think that is really challenging. It probably comes back to one of the other challenges that you mentioned, which is time management, which, you're trying to juggle, particularly if you're a single parent, you're trying to juggle work. That might be full-time work. You are trying to juggle schools, and those might be multiple schools if you've got a child in infant school, junior school, senior school. And, quite frankly, the amount of communication that comes out of my children's schools requires full-time attention, or balls are dropped quite regularly. And then all their social activities, and then you're thinking about, I need to have these conversations because he's sitting in his, or she's sitting in their room quite a lot. how can we start to look at how we're managing our time to be able to parent as successfully as we can, particularly if we're doing it on our own?
I think it is just a question, even listening to this and you go, yeah, I don't know. So you just say, I'm going to carve out, kids are out or they're in bed or whatever, and I'm going to get a cup of coffee and a piece of paper, because I just automatically go to coaching kind of questions. And I would write down perhaps some of the things that I'm struggling with, and you get them out of your head, you get them onto a piece of paper. It's quite good. You get real clarity, put them into bullet points or something, and then just a little brainstorm and ponder. You don't have to get the answers there and then, but you just have it there and you think, now what can I do differently than I'm currently doing? Where can I get some support for that? Or what do I need to change? Or what could I say? So you just start looking, rather than being in the socks and pants of life, which we all get stuck in. It is a little more of a coming up here moment, into the bigger picture and looking at what's happening in your life, and then sort of thinking about what you can do to it, and doing that every so often. You don't have to do it every week or anything. You don't have to do it every month, but certainly every sort of little while, have a pause to ponder moment about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and is it working? And if it's not, then tweak it or get a bit of some help with someone to talk it through with you, coach it through with you.
I mean, that's a great advice for people who are parenting as a couple. I think
Yes.
parenting is something you just kind of expect to be able to do a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't consciously often think about how I parent, which is ludicrous, because it's a really, really important thing. And we've said, well, we opened the episode with "It ain't easy." So I think being conscious about it is probably a good tip for anyone. So, I mean, I wonder, let's move on to some of the positive aspects that you referenced at the start. Talk to us about the bond that can develop then for a single parent with their children.
Well, you forge sort of trust and understanding, but the key thing here is, don't be your child's friend. Be their parent, but you can have a really strong bond with them. Don't just give in to them because you want to please them. You've got to still say no and have boundaries around them, no matter how old they are. But you do develop an understanding and a closeness, if you're lucky enough to create that and nurture it with your kids, which is very special, I think, really. You often hear people, like Ian Wright talks about, his childhood and different friendships that he made and the bond that he had for certain things. And you hear of that. May not happen, of course, as well. No pressure if it doesn't. But there's also, then, we talked about sort of personal growth that can come from this, that you yourself, again, this is all about, my whole thing is about mindful parenting, and not many people do it. Let's be honest, mate. You said you don't do it. Hundreds and hundreds of people don't pause to ponder their parenting, and yet it's one of the most important jobs you'll ever do in your life, I think. But it's about then learning to be resilient, learning what works for you, what doesn't work for you, looking at your own confidence, because that can get a big knock during a time of change or transition, or, when you're going through change of separating or divorcing, that can really hit you there with your confidence. So look at that and develop your confidence, which is a personal thing, which can be a wonderful thing. You suddenly grow and expand and blossom and bloom. And as I say, model some strength, then your children are going to notice that and observe that from you. And so there are good things that come from it. And you may look back in hindsight and say, gosh, that's one of the best things that did happen to me, because I got a bit lost in that relationship in the past, or I was putting up with something I shouldn't be, that may be more dangerous and not good for your children to see, if it's domestic violence or something like that. So yes, it's just taking stock. Take stock, and then you can sort of transform into taking off like a phoenix.
I wonder if we should talk a little bit about some legal stuff, keeping it very light on the legal stuff, because goodness, that's the most boring bit. So I'm going to ask you the question now, Lisa, because you're so prepared with all your facts and figures, so you're all over this and I'm just winging it. In terms of support that's sort of, I guess, quasi-legal for someone who's embarking on a sole parenting journey, what is there in terms of frameworks? I mean, we talk to clients about parenting plans and things. I mean, maybe we should unpack those a little bit and see how, what's a parenting plan? How can that help someone with their single parenting themselves and doing the mindful parenting, or more commonly with a co-parent, even if the co-parent maybe isn't all that involved?
Yeah, parenting plans are great. And perhaps we can put a link in the show notes to the one on the CAFCAS officers website, because they have a great free parenting plan available. And it's about opening up the conversation. So we're coming back to communication. And when you're going through a divorce and separation, and when you're parenting or co-parenting, one of the difficulties can be that, once again, we can make assumptions as to, we think that parent's on the same page as us, but actually there might be things that will come up further down the line, such as new partners being introduced, etc., that you just haven't spoken about. So you don't know how each other really truly feels about it. So a parenting plan is an opportunity to sit down and have those discussions. I personally think they work quite well when both parents complete the plan themselves. So they answer all of the questions, and then they come together to have a look at, right, what do we agree on? What do we not agree on? And then they can concentrate on the bits they don't agree on and have those conversations to hopefully, obviously, bridge that gap and reach an agreement. If they're not able to reach an agreement on some of these points, then it may be that they consider something like mediation. So that's where they would sit down together with an independent third party to help try and unpick some of these issues. The parenting plans are really great. As I say, it's just an opportunity to have those conversations. I guess it is assuming that you are co-parenting with somebody quite successfully. You're able to communicate. It becomes a little bit more challenging if you have an ex-partner who will not communicate with you, who is very much, it's my way or the highway. In those circumstances, a parenting plan might not work so well. It may be that we have to move towards what we would call parallel parenting, which is where you kind of accept that you both have very different parenting styles, that you're not going to be able to control how the children are parented in your ex-partner's house, and therefore you parent quite separately. So we look at it from they call it parallel parenting. You kind of parent alongside each other, but the children effectively might have different rules depending on which house they're in. Not ideal, but it can work in the circumstances. What are your thoughts on sort of the differences between co-parenting and parallel parenting, Sue?
Well, it's very interesting as you were saying that. I mean, it's really great to hear you raise that and talk that through for people listening. And people go, oh gosh, aren't they going to get mixed messages? But actually, children are very adaptable. They kind of get, oh, we can't do that in dad's house, but we can do that in mum's. Only if it sets up conflict, certainly around digital devices and how long they spend on them, and they're gaming until 11 o'clock at night, over the weekend, and go back to school on Monday exhausted. That can cause conflict. But actually, children can adapt and understand if you're parallel parenting, and that's okay. And, one parent says, eat your broccoli and hold your knife and fork properly, and the other seems to be a bit of a Disneyland parent, if you like, always giving in and letting them have a good time. But over time, children adjust to those things, and they do look back and they do sort of can see where the boundaries are sometimes, and that they won't probably thank you, even if they're married and having their own kids, about what you did. But parallel parenting can work okay too, just as if you can't quite agree on certain things.
Our children should never thank their parents. Zero chance I'm ever thanking mine. Absolutely not. I wonder if we kind of maybe finish before we move on to some top tips and things about a very specific type of co-parenting, which is something that Lisa and I and the teams will deal with quite a bit, is where you have parties who live a long, long way away from each other, whether at different ends of the country or you have an overseas parent. So there are cases that go through the family court and called leave to remove or relocation applications where children have been moved overseas, or perhaps the court said, well, no, you can't move the children overseas, they stay here, but the parent has had to relocate for work or whatever. So that's a sort of, you'll in those circumstances where the travel's excessive and you can't do weekends and you can't do overnights and you're looking at longer blocks of time because it's holidays for 3 weeks or whatever it may be, you end up with kind of two single parents operating quite independently. What are the specific challenges with those situations?
Gosh, that's an interesting question that I hadn't necessarily prepared for, but I will jump in and think about it.
Well, completely blindsided you. So,
but that's all right, because it's very interesting, that, isn't it? I have a client like that, actually. And so she manages that by when her child is in England and he's at boarding school and she's over somewhere else. She constantly has Zoom calls with her son so that she's actively involved in the relationship on the day-to-day. So she knows the homework and she knows how he's feeling about that friend or whatever. So that works quite well. And then he flies over, at holidays and all of that to spend the blocks of times there. It can be quite difficult, can't it? Because again, if the values aren't always similar, But stay actively involved. And that's when the digital devices do come into play, actually, because you can, with a WhatsApp and an emoji, to be quite honest, communicate with your kids quite often and quite easily. So you don't have to be completely in their lives day to day all the time physically. You can manage it, from a distance if you have that intention, and keep it light, and don't be kind of interrogating them about their lives because you're kind of worried about them, or you are hovering over them like helicopter parents. But actually, like everything, there is no one size fits all. There is no immediate answer for all sorts of things. You have to kind of find your own way that works for you, and trust yourself, and trust that you have your child's best interests at heart, but have the intention always to be in their lives, and that then other things will fall into place around that, I think.
I think that's really helpful advice. It can be, it's hard. It must be tremendously hard for these parents not seeing their kids for weeks and weeks on end, and you don't want to have to see them and then go, oh, so how's, little Johnny, your best mate, and like, oh no, we fell out 3 months ago. Keeping in touch is really, really important, and kids don't always communicate brilliantly over FaceTime and Zoom and stuff, and it can be sometimes a bit unrewarding, I think, for parents, those calls, but it is super important, and kind of keeps the fluidity.
And stick with it is my advice. I had a client who said, well, it's not working out too well, and he's a bit monosyllabic, or she's like this and that. I said, just keep turning up, because that shows you care, that shows you love that child no matter what. And it's a bit orcs and they're not perhaps chatty, but okay, be a lighter touch with that, and do keep this bigger picture, because it might be here that they're not doing too well with chatting to you, but in another 3 months it might have moved on into a different place. So always turn up and keep trying. I think that's the important thing, because they unconsciously will know that you love them unconditionally and you won't give up.
Yeah, I think sometimes as well, there's just that parental expectation of things like phone calls and Teams meetings, and it's going to be, half an hour, and it'll be a great conversation, and they're going to tell me everything about their day. But we all know that when kids come home from school, even when you're there and you say to them, like, did you have a good day? They're like, yes. What did you do? I can't remember. What did you eat for lunch? I don't know. Who did you sit next to? I can't remember. And so you may well get exactly the same conversation on the telephone, and that's not a reflection of it being sort of remote or them not wanting to speak to you. It's just the reality of children sometimes.
I mean, at least you're getting yes for the "did you have a good day" conversation. All I ever get is mid. Everything's mid. So there we go. You're one of them. Yes to a good day is better than a midday.
I'm quite scared that I don't know what mid means.
My hand was up, I don't know what that is.
Oh, no, maybe maybe this is an age 10 bracket thing. Everything's mid. Okay. It's mid, middle, mid.
Okay. All right. Well, we've learnt something there.
Yeah, there we go.
Clearly, I'm down.
I've obviously skipped that one.
But you're right, actually, to raise that point. Expectations get really over exaggerated because you're looking forward to speaking to your child or whatever. Actually, just go with the flow, because they can be like that. It's the same thing as, when they do rush out of school and you go, how was your day? It's the wrong time. With my own kids, it was when we were eating, or when they were little, it'd be when they were in the bath or something, they'd start opening up, or, sitting on the end of the bed I remember this story when my son came in, he'd been out and about, he was a teenager, and I went to bed. I was teaching other people's children. I was knackered, so I went to bed with a hot chocolate and a book, and he came in and sat on the end of the bed, and I just sensed he wanted to open up and talk to me. So I put the glasses down, put the book down, and we had one of those, what I call magic moments. Actually, it was about 11 o'clock at night when I thought, God, this is not really what I thought I was going to be doing. But there was the great magic moment in the chat and in the sort of connection that we got together on that as well. So always look for that, and don't have these huge expectations sometimes. Keep the bigger picture. Again, you're in their lives. When they need to talk to you, if they want to, they will.
I mean, that's all brilliant, helpful advice, Sue. Really important. So, as you'll know from being a frequent flyer on Stowe Talks, we like to finish with a little bit of a summary, a little bit of positivity as well. So, if you could just give us your couple of top tips for anyone listening to this to help with single parenting, just to close out the show, please.
Oh, yes, I won't tell you all 12 of them then. So anyway, here they go, some of them. You can't pour from an empty cup. So take time to rest, to eat well, to exercise, and nurture your own interests and your friendships in small ways. I think that's so important. It's the small stuff. Accept help from family and from friends and school communities and groups that you are, part of. Don't do it all on your own. You don't have to do it on your own. Keep your communication open with your children. Keep it age appropriate, though. That's very important. Don't be your child's friend, be their parent, but keep that nice, honest and reassuring kind of tone. Let them know it's okay to talk about their feelings. I think that's very important because they change all the time, just as yours are changing. They're like jelly, aren't they? They wobble about a bit with emotions as you're going through the process. But be consistent in your routines and around meals and around homework and around bedtimes. Create that security, because I think that really helps children adjust to change. And then there's all the other stuff about managing your finances and stay organized and, have some healthy boundaries and stuff. But also the final thing for me is that we don't do enough as parents, whether we're doing it solo or not, is celebrate your small wins. Life is all about the small wins. It's not about these huge, big things that you want to celebrate. So celebrate them in some small way, whatever that might be for you. And I think that's an important thing to keep you motivated and keep you moving forward and keep you positive.
Oh, brilliant. I love those. Thanks so much, Sue. So that's it for this episode of Stowe Talks. Thanks for listening. You can learn more about the work Sue does on her website, sueatkinsparentingcoach.com, or on Facebook via Sue Atkins, the Parenting Coach. If you would like more information on our podcasts, head over to stowtalks.co.uk and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.